And welcome to this meeting of the Metro Inner Development Assessment Panel. I declare the meeting open at 9:34 a.m. I acknowledge we're hosting this meeting on the traditional land of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. We acknowledge the Aboriginal people as traditional custodians of Western Australia, pay respects to elders past and present, and the ongoing connection between people, land, waters, and community. This meeting will be run in accordance with the DAP Standing Orders 2024 under the DAP Regulations 2011. The meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the DAP website in accordance with Regulation 43A of the DAP Regulations. Panel members may refer to technical devices throughout the meeting to assist them in considering the matters before them. I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce the members present today. My name is Dale Page. I'm the presiding member for today's meeting. In the room with me, I have Clayton Hyam to my left, who is the deputy presiding member, and Andrew Howe, specialist member. For parts B of the agenda, we will have Councillor Matthew Woodall from the City of Melville, our local government DAP member, and Councillor Daniel Lim, local government DAP member, City of Melville. For part C of the agenda, we will have Councillor Ben Kunza for the City of Canning. Welcome to you all. Item 2 is apologies. We have received an apology from Mayor Patrick Hall, our local government DAP member from the City of Canning. Item 3, members on leave of absence. There are nil. Noting of minutes. Minutes of all previous meetings are available on the DAP website. Moving to part B of our agenda, which deals with the City of Melville item. Item 1 on the agenda is declaration of due consideration. Panel members need to have considered all the documentation contained within Part B of the agenda and the Part B related information, noting that an R13 direction response was published on the 4th of July 2025. Could I please confirm by a show of hands that members have considered all information? Thank you. Item 2, disclosures of interest. No disclosures of interest have been received to this point. Do any members wish to make any declarations of interest in relation to this item? And could I check with our local government DAP members whether or not this application has been before you at a council meeting or a briefing?
No, it hasn't, and no declaration from me. Thank you.
Excellent. If there are no other declarations, we will move on to item 3, which is our Form 1 application for consideration today. Lot 1, numbers 2A and 2B, Broadhurst Crescent, and Lot 5, number 1, Islip Court, Bateman. Childcare premises, DAP number 25/02858. We have 2 presenters on this item today. We have Tom O'Rourke, and I believe we have Tom online, who will be speaking against the recommendation in the report, and Alessandro Stagno from Apex Planning, who is in the room with us speaking in favour of the recommendation of the report. Presenters, I remind you that in accordance with clause 4.8.2 of our DAP standing orders, your presentation is limited to 3 minutes and no extensions of time have been granted today. We've read all the written documentation you've provided, so I encourage you to focus on the key aspects of your presentation that you'd like to get across within the designated 3-minute time frame. Panel members will be able to ask you questions after your presentation. Do we have Tom online?
I'm online, yes.
Thanks. We're just waiting to get a visual. There you are. Welcome, Tom. Your 3 minutes starts whenever you're ready.
Okay, well, thank you very much, panel members and presiding member, for giving me the opportunity to speak on this item. As an affected community member, I've reviewed all the information contained in the Responsible Authority report and all the appendices to that, and I'm very concerned that the acoustic report that's been included underestimates the noise impacts of the proposed development, particularly as it adjoins noise-sensitive residential properties, and it doesn't actually consider the impact the development will have by comparing what the final outcome may be compared to the existing amenity of the locality. As you would have read in my submitted deputation, there is some glaring errors that I consider to be included in that acoustic report. First and foremost, the estimated noise outputs that have been used in estimating the noise generated by the development has used unverifiable inputs compared to what is best practice, which is using verifiable third-party independent information, generally from the AAAC, the Australian Association of Acoustic Consultants. So when you read the acoustic report, they've used a level of 83 decibels for 10 children older than 2 years, whereas the AAAC uses up to 87 decibels, which is a considerable difference, which when you carry through that variance into having 100 children would create a noise environment that is entirely unacceptable in a residential environment. It also doesn't consider the cumulative nature of noise. So when you've got noise from multiple different sources, those need to be added up to come to a final conclusion as to what that final noise output will be. What's also concerning in that regard is that mechanical services haven't been included. So there could be things like car park exhaust systems, which are usually very noisy. And given that the conclusions made in the current acoustic report has noise from children alone, only one source being right on the limit of what the assigned levels for adjoining properties would be, using underestimated inputs, it would be very likely that the noise generated by this development would exceed the assigned levels. Bearing in mind that mere compliance with the assigned levels under the noise regulations does not mean that the amenity of adjoining properties has not been affected. In order to come to the conclusion that the amenity has not been affected, you need to have a investigation done onto what the existing noise amenity would be and what the final outcome would be. And that information just hasn't been included in the acoustic report, so that it's impossible to actually tell how the amenity of the adjoining noise-sensitive receivers would be affected without that information. On that point,
you're at your 3 minutes, Tom, so I'm going to ask you
no
to wrap
worries.
up.
No, all the rest is included in my deputation as presented.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you. I'm now going to ask panel members if you have any questions of this presenter. Councillor Woodall, do you have any questions of this presenter? You do have your hand up on screen, so I'm just wondering if... Is that just the mouse? All right, thank you. Councillor Lim, any questions of this presenter?
Nothing from me, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Any other panel members have questions of this presenter?
Tom, what's your background in this area of expertise?
I adjoin another childcare centre, so I've been through this rigmarole before.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Tom. Thanks for your time. Next presenter, would you like to come forward? And your 3 minutes starts whenever you're ready. Okay.
Alrighty. Thank you very much, Presiding Member. Good morning, panel members. I'm the applicant of the childcare premises proposed at number 1 Islip Court and 2A and 2B Broadhurst Crescent in Bateman. I'm joined by Jeff Harris of Herring Store Acoustics, who's available on Zoom. He'll be available for any questions in relation to the acoustic assessment. I'll be very brief, or as brief as I can. The application before you is recommended for approval by the City of Melville. They've prepared a comprehensive RAR with a thorough town planning assessment. The RAR articulates sound reasons why the development should be approved. The subject site meets all of the preferred site and locational criteria under the city's childcare policy, noting it's in a corner location with 3 road frontages and has a direct interface with Corpus Christi Educational Precinct, which has an enrolment of around 1,700 students from the kindergarten to Year 12 age groups. The facility is designed sympathetically to its residential context, and it presents an elegant building aesthetic in a split-level format which responds to the subject site's sloping topography. Potential amenity impacts, including noise impacts, have been reduced through a high-quality design approach and have been appropriately assessed through expert reporting prepared as part of the application materials, and these were vetted by the City of Melville as part of the DA assessment process. The acoustic assessment was prepared by Herring Storer Acoustics, who are highly experienced and qualified acoustic engineers. The acoustic report adopts the correct assessment methodology, which has been consistently used for previous childcare applications that have been supported by local governments and approved by the DAP. The acoustic report considers the accessible noise sources, and even goes the extra mile by considering noise sources that are exempt under the regulations and demonstrates acoustic compliance is readily achievable from these noise sources. Conditions 16, 17 and 18 of the City's recommendation provide the security that the proposed development will be constructed in accordance with the acoustic recommendations and will comply with the noise regulations during the operational phase of the development. With these points considered, it's our respectful submission that the technical issues raised by the previous presenter carry little weight, noting particularly I don't believe they're a qualified acoustic engineer and they haven't disclosed how the noise generated by this centre relates to them or their property specifically. We therefore respectfully request the panel grants approval of the development, and of course myself and Jeff are available for questions as necessary.
Thank you very much. The councillors online. Councillor Woodall, do you have any questions of the applicant?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Councillor Lim, any questions from you?
Yeah, I think just one question. So I did see that the officer comments did say that there was a revision to address the changes made to the retaining wall and basement. Do you mind speaking a bit about the actions you have taken to address that? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So firstly, that change related to the removal of retaining walls that face Broadhurst Crescent. That was done to improve the visual element of the facility. We had that checked by the acoustic consultants when the change was made, and they advised that because the car park is at a much lower level compared to the street, and also the fact that that side of the facility doesn't directly abut any residential properties, that it will still comply. That's also covered under condition 16 of the city's recommendations. So there'll be a verification assessment prior to commencement to ensure that it still complies.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions, Councillor Lim?
Not for me. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any questions from other panel members?
Thank you. Sandro, how many children at one time would be playing outside?
That's a good question. The way that the assessment is undertaken, and I may have to defer to Jeff on this as well, I believe it's done on a worst case scenario basis with all kids outside all at the same time, and then the noise mitigation measures derived based on that worst case scenario. In practice, play is undertaken on a group by group basis. So usually you have around 50 to 60% of kids outside at one time, because there's obviously really high quality internal play areas as well. So the groups are staggered and rotated over the course of a day. So therefore, what's assessed in the acoustic report represents really the worst case scenario that would very rarely, if ever, occur.
Okay. And another question is to do with the conditions. Are you happy with the conditions that have been proposed?
Yeah, we're not requesting any amendments to the conditions today.
Thank you.
Does the car park have a mechanical ventilation?
It's open on two sides. I believe that it's got sufficient ventilation, but if there was to be any, it would be within that screened mechanical plant area that's at the rear of the building. We've actually specifically provided an acoustic screen to enclose that area. There's a condition that requires a verification assessment for mechanical plant. So obviously the development can't be occupied until such time that we can actually demonstrate that any mechanical plant that's included complies with the noise regs.
Secondly, there's sort of a, looking at the site plan, there's a smallish strip of accessible area adjacent to the backyards of these residential areas, but that's presumably not a sort of a play area. So
just a side setback area that only staff could access for any maintenance purposes.
Anything further? No. Alessandro, you've got your acoustic consultant here, and so you have covered this off, but I wouldn't mind posing the question to them, please, that the previous presenter suggested that the acoustic report underestimates the noise impact on adjoining residential properties and doesn't consider the cumulative impact of noise from multiple sources. Could I get the comment, is it Jeff Harris? Jeff, did you want to comment on the issues that have been raised by the previous presenter, please?
In regards to cumulative, basically decibels are a logarithmic scale. So if we're adding, just let me pull up the report super quick. A noise level of during the day period of 40 to 47, the increase in noise is not going to be more than 47 in this case. So the cumulative effect of a worst case air conditioning combined with a worst case children playing will still comply with the regulations in this case.
Okay, thank you. Back to you, Alessandro. Condition 13 states that heavily tinted glazing at ground floor level is not permitted. Are you comfortable you know what does or does not constitute heavily tinted glazing? It's a little bit...
Yeah, when you put the question in that way, it's not a defined term, and heavily can be a subjective term. So if I was to interpret it myself, I would imagine it means heavily tinted to the point that there's no permeability, but that's my interpretation.
And you're happy to work with the city to make sure that that condition's addressed? You're not proposing anything that would contradict that condition?
No. So where the internal play spaces face the external play spaces, the glazing has to be permeable because there needs to be a direct line of sight in and out for safety purposes. If there is any tinting, to reduce UV into the building, I believe there's a form of tinting that can be applied that still ensures that there's permeability but reduces the UV. So I believe that would be the form of tinting that would be included.
Thank you. I think we'll move on now to the local government offices, and we've got Dion Hinge and Kate Bainbridge with us today from the City of Melville. Councillors online, do you have any questions you would like to ask the City officers? Councillor Woodall?
No, nothing from me.
Councillor Lim?
My side, thank you.
No? Any questions from other panel members?
No, thanks.
In relation to condition 22, and I take you to parts G and H, it seems odd that given that the waste disposal area is shown on the plans, that there's a requirement there for it to be conveniently located and not readily accessible by the public. That strikes me as being a bit redundant. Is that correct?
Sorry, through the chair. Could I just get that question repeated? I'm not entirely sure. If you could please repeat the question. Yeah, sorry.
That's all right. I'm talking about condition 22, parts G and H.
Yeah.
And that's requiring the bin compound to be conveniently located and not really accessible by the public, but it's already shown on the plans. So is that really necessary?
Thank you. Through the chair. Yes, it's fine to be deleted. It's just a standard condition with regards to making sure that the public, it's sort of located away from areas which are sort of more publicly accessible. So there's not any chance of, any interference or anything like that. And also just making sure that, it's not changed and that they use the location. So it is shown in the plans and there's condition around development being provided in accordance with the plan. So happy for those two sections to be deleted if you believe this. So thank you.
Thank you. And
sorry, before you go back, so on that, there seems to be a lot of explanatory information included in condition 22, and that particularly the latter part that Member Hyam's talking about, all those explanatory dot points. Do you usually include that as a condition? Wouldn't it be better suited as an advice note?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Happy for those to be included as an advice note and agree, and we'll take that on board for future conditioning.
Okay.
in relation to condition 23, F, we're talking about public road here. Isn't it the responsibility of the local government to manage queuing of traffic and parking along the public road?
Thank you, through the chair. the operational management plan we find very helpful with childcare centres because it will require the childcare staff to direct people accordingly so they don't park in the public realm, and that they actually, similar to schools, for example, usually have some sort of warden during drop-off and pick-up times so that people can move through in an appropriate way so they don't cause traffic issues on site. Is responsibility of the operator, in our opinion, to make sure they don't cause a traffic issue as a result of their operations on site. So by having this operational management plan, we believe that they have a responsibility to appropriately manage the car parking and the traffic flow to not cause incident on our local roads.
How would they physically prevent someone parking on the road?
So thank you through the chair. By having someone on site during in the sort of car parking areas, usually helping direct people, you can usually help, especially when they first start operating. We find that usually quite helpful to encourage people to come on site and then also to leave in a sort of safe way. So it's very similar to what we see with primary schools where they have a traffic warden assist with the flow of drop off and pick up.
Okay.
Before you move off that, sorry, we seem to be picking up on the same things today, which is good, I guess. So can I just clarify, is your expectation then through that operational management plan that there will be a staff member during peak drop-off and pick-up periods standing in the car park helping people manoeuvre through? And does the applicant understand that requirement?
Thank you. Just in relation to that, it is an option. So what we find is that, especially when they first open, there's usually a bit of confusion as where people can park and whatnot, especially the staff car parking in one section and the customer drop off and pick up. And there might be some bays that are a little bit wider and hence more suitable for certain vehicles. So we find, especially during the initial opening, it's really good to have someone assist with the direction of vehicles. But once it's been operating for a while, this is less necessary, because people have got familiarity with the centre and hence know what they're doing. So what we find is it's usually required for, maybe even like a couple of weeks, and then that's it. So it's usually a very short-term measure to make sure people park on site and not in the street, and that they don't park in the staffing areas as well. So it's a very short-term measure to get it right at the start.
Thank you. Back to you.
No, I'm fine, thanks.
I have a few questions, if you don't mind. So could you just comment for me, please, on the key differences, particularly as they pertain to impacts on neighbours in the surrounding area between the current proposal and the approved childcare centre that could still be constructed on the site under the valid approval? And I note from your report there's an additional 25 places proposed and a difference in operating hours. But in terms of built form, traffic and noise impacts, what do you think the key differences are, and are there any?
Thank you. Through the chair. So in terms of built form, so obviously this proposal was assessed on its merit. I think with the previous built form, there was a significant level of retaining along the street boundaries. In this case, that has been reduced. In terms of the number of children, obviously there has been an increase in there, and to accommodate that, they've made sure there's suitable areas, space for outdoor play, which has been made available through the use of the basement car park, making sure they've got adequate space there. And so also going back to what Alessandro was mentioning earlier as well around that space obviously not being used by all the children at the same time, making sure that it can accommodate those extra children as well. Thank you. Okay,
thank you. I note you've done an assessment against the 10 design principles of SPP 7.0, and I'm not questioning that assessment. I think you've done a good job, but could you just explain why a development like this wasn't referred to your design review panel?
Thank you. Through the chair, we reserve our design review panel referrals for more complex and more substantial development applications. So we have a list of criteria within our design review local planning policy, and these types of developments are not listed as that what would refer. We don't charge applicants for design review, so just being fiscally responsible as well in relation to what we send through to design review.
Okay, thank you. Just on the issue of acoustics, so you've asked for a revised acoustic assessment and largely around mechanical stuff as a condition of approval. Do you think that that condition will adequately cover off any relevant or valid concerns that the first presenter may have raised?
Thank you, through the chair. Somewhat. There's usually not the choice of mechanical equipment until you get into detailed design. And so having that additional report allows for more thorough modelling to occur, which takes into consideration the specifics of the mechanical equipment that has been selected. So if there's a requirement for additional measures to ensure a compliance with the noise regulations for acoustic performance, then that can be addressed at that stage. So having that additional reporting provides that a necessary safeguard to ensure that there is 100% compliance, even if they do pick a different mechanical equipment through the detailed design process. It's a very standard process, and we find it works really well.
So is that the purpose of condition 18, where you require a noise report to be submitted within 3 months to confirm? And if it doesn't comply, then what?
Thank you, through the chair.
How do you compel the applicant to make changes?
If it doesn't comply, then there's two avenues. There's through the noise regulation, so noise complaint, and they'd have to introduce measures to ensure compliance. So things like acoustic treatments. I'd have to defer to the acoustic consultant on that. But there are a number of acoustic treatments, or even potentially change in mechanical equipment to ensure compliance with the noise regulations.
Okay. And then condition 17 requires the applicant to demonstrate the development has been built in compliance with the recommendation of the report. How is the applicant meant to demonstrate that? I think the conditions 18 talks about operations 3 months later, but condition 17 seems to be asking for something different. And how are they meant to demonstrate that? Is it a certification from
yes, thank you, through the chair. Yes, we'd prefer to see something from the acoustic consultant that they've inspected and are satisfied with the acoustic treatments, that ensuring compliance with the initial and subsequent noise reports.
Okay, thank you. These are minor things, but there's an issue with numbering of conditions after condition 24. So specifically, there's no number allocated to the condition relating to the construction management plan. Are you happy for us to deal with that administratively? So it should be condition 25.
Thank you. Yes, thanks for picking that up. Yes, happy for that to be included as a separate condition. Thanks for picking that up.
Okay, so we won't move amendments to deal with that. We'll just deal with that administratively. Condition 25 states that external lighting should not compromise safety and amenity. How will you measure that, particularly the amenity issue? Is it simply adhering to that Australian standard mentioned in that condition?
Thank you, through the chair. So it's just making sure that the external lighting is directed as such, so that it doesn't cause amenity concerns. So yeah, there's an Australian standard. If we receive complaint, then we have the necessary condition in place to have the enforcement. But we usually find that people are very good at installing lights in an appropriate manner.
Okay. I just have seen before where the issue of amenity, the neighbour complains about the lighting affecting amenity. It complies with the Australian standard, but the wording of that condition makes it difficult for you to enforce because it becomes a subjective issue. So I just wanted to check that with you. Are you comfortable that that condition is tight enough that you'll be able to manage that from a compliance point of view?
Yes, it's a standard condition, and we haven't had issues in enforcement with this condition.
Okay. Then the requirements of condition 27 relating to temporary structures during construction, wouldn't that ordinarily just form part of the construction management plan? Or do you prefer to keep that as a separate condition, and why?
Thank you through the chair. Some of these conditions are in relation to specific and nuanced issues that have popped up, and we have found that having these separate types of conditions helps us with enforcement. It is best dealt with under construction management plan, but what we find is sometimes throughout the construction they may require temporary structures, and they are very much temporary. So they might not necessarily always be captured by the construction management plan, but yeah, it's neither here nor there. It's just an additional fail-safe based on some experiences we've had throughout construction in the city of Melville.
Okay. And then lastly, and it is a minor thing, Advice Note 8 is a duplicate of Advice Note 3. Are you happy for us to delete Advice Note 8 administratively?
Thank you. Yes, that's fine.
Thank you. I have no further questions, so unless you have
Sorry, I
follow-up.
just have a follow-up question, which is to do with Advice Note 4. Would that be better as a condition?
Thank you through the chair. No, as it relates to other legislation.
Okay. What other legislation does it relate to?
It's usually to do with noise, I believe. So yeah, it's to do with service vehicles. Yeah. So the hours of operation that's been listed are in relation to noise. So it is covered by noise regulations.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. If there are no further questions from panel members, we might then move to the report. Members, you have a report in front of you with a recommendation for approval subject to conditions. I'd like to seek a mover and seconder for the recommendation in the report. Would anyone like to move the recommendation? Councillor Lim, would anyone like to second that recommendation? Thank you, Clayton. Councillor Lim, as mover, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I do take into account Tom's deputation. And I do understand there is noise that comes with the development. But I feel like this has been ethically addressed by the developer or the applicant. Yeah, like the play area is cushioned by landscaping, and it is away from the residents. And I do also note that condition 16 has a revised acoustic report as well. So any subsequent reports will be considered before development commences. And as a parent of 2 young children, it is incredibly difficult to secure childcare. So this is much needed by the community. Yeah, it's just the stress that comes with the long wait lists of daycare. I feel like this development does will provide benefit to all residents around the area. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lim. Clayton, would you like to speak?
Yes, thank you. Look, I support Councillor Lim's position on this, and from what I have read and what I've seen, the proposal is well within the framework, the planning framework, and satisfies the objectives of the scheme and Estate Planning Policy 7. Having said that, I note the concerns of the neighbours in relation to traffic and noise. However, having listened to the presenters today and having read through all the documentation, I'm quite satisfied that the noise issue can be managed, and certainly with the additional condition to review that, I think would add to my satisfaction that this can be managed. I think it's a well-written report, and I thank the officers for that. I would like to just propose a couple of amendments based on my questioning earlier, and I would like to delete parts 22G and part 22H. Also, well, perhaps we'll just do one at a time, will we?
Let's deal with them one at a time. I'm happy to second that, but I'm wondering whether or not you would consider deleting A to H and the bin and the detail contained in there and including that as an advice note as your amendment.
Yes, happy to do that.
Right, so the amendment being moved is to delete the latter part of condition 22 from where the wording states the bin compounds are to be constructed to satisfy the following requirements, and then the requirements A to H. Those are very useful, but more appropriate as an advice note. Yeah?
Yes, happy with that.
All right, I have nothing to add to that. Does anyone wish to speak for or against that amendment? No? Let's put that amendment to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you.
The other matter, Madam Chair, is condition 23F. I understand the officer's comments, but in my experience with schools and that, yes, they do have a...
Sorry, just before you give your reasoning, are you proposing to delete
Yes.
subpoint F? Okay,
Yes.
could I seek a seconder? Is there a seconder for that amendment, please? Member Howe, back to you.
Yes, the operational management plan can include someone who deals with traffic queuing or the movement within the car park, but it is the local government's responsibility to really deal with any illegal parking within the street. And I don't think that a person employed by the child care centre has any legal ability to say to someone you can't park there. And in a couple of the streets, they're a long way from the entrance to the child care centre anyway. So, and plus there's the school opposite, and somebody might be dropping a child off at that school and also a child at the child care centre. So I don't see that's a responsibility of the operator of the child care centre.
Thank you. Andrew, would you like to speak a second?
No, other than to, I agree. I don't think that anyone working for the childcare centre has any authority or jurisdiction in a public road reserve.
Thank you. I'll speak briefly to that amendment. Picking up on the responses that we got from the officers, which were very helpful, I think subpoints A, B, the rest of those subpoints actually cover off on the intent of what the city is trying to achieve. I do agree that preventing queuing and traffic along public roads is probably not the role of an employee of the childcare centre. If the intent is to manage traffic flow within the site, then that is fine, then there shouldn't be an issue on the road. So I will support the deletion of point F. Does any other member wish to speak for or against the deletion of point F? Councillor Woodall?
Thank you. Look, I oppose the deletion of point F. I do take on board the point about the legal authority of an employee. However, I think it could probably, I'd prefer to see it reworded to say minimising rather than preventing, because I think there is a role to play with just encouraging patrons, encouraging parents dropping off their children to use the facilities on site and not to park or queue on the road. So even though there may not be legal authority for an employee to prevent it, they can certainly minimise it by encouraging people to use the site. So I oppose it being deleted entirely on that basis.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak for or against this amendment? All right, let's put that amendment to the vote. Or do you wish to close on the amendment? So let's put that amendment to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Anything else you wish to raise, Secretary? Right. Does any other, we're reverting back to the primary motion now. Does any other member wish to speak for or against? Councillor Woodall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would actually like to move an amendment to condition 6, the hours of operation. So I'd like to change 6:30 a.m. to 7 a.m.
Thank you, councillor. Do I have a seconder for that amendment? No, then that amendment.
I can second that. Sorry, Madam Chair.
Do you
I was just
second?
trying to catch up. I'll second it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Woodall, would you wish to speak to the amendment?
Yes, thank you. Just briefly, there's been some concerns raised about noise levels and impact on amenity from neighbours, noting it is in a largely residential area. And I think to some extent those have been addressed by the limit on the outdoor play area and service vehicle access. So though that's not to occur before 7 a.m. However, I believe that with many, given the size of the childcare centre under this approval would be larger and there'd be more parents dropping off children during the hours of operation, I do think there is potentially an impact from the number of vehicles coming and going from the property. And also noting that vehicle noise levels are not specifically provided for under the noise legislation, which is perhaps unfortunate, I think, and a bit of an oversight in that legislation. But nevertheless, with other childcare centres in the city of Melville, where they've been approved and they are in residential areas and do abut residential properties, we generally, I believe, have insisted on the hours of operation being no earlier than 7 a.m. And I think given the concerns raised by local residents around amenity and impact of noise, I think it's it's only half an hour difference, but I think it does to some extent address those concerns and just ensure that those noise impacts are during the hours stated in the City of Melville policy around hours of operation for childcare and residential. So for the sake of consistency, I believe it would be reasonable to amend that to 7 a.m. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. Councillor Lim, would you like to speak as seconder?
No, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Okay, does any other member wish to speak for or against this amendment?
Madam Chair, I support Councillor Woodall's motion on the basis that I'm presuming that staff would be able to arrive before the 7 a.m. start to open the place up and get it ready for the receipt of children. So I'm happy to support it on that basis.
Okay, I will speak against the amendment because I believe that strictly speaking, if the hours of operation say 7, then staff can't arrive before 7. And that I think makes it a little bit difficult. I do understand the concerns about impact on neighbours of that extra half an hour. But I think given there are conditions that stipulate that no children can play outside before 7 a.m, given the parking is contained in a basement area, I may or may not be accurate here, but slamming of car doors I think is covered by the noise regs. I'm pretty comfortable that that extra half an hour would allow staff to arrive and a handful of patrons and get going. I just think, strictly speaking, if we limit it to 7, it means that staff can't get there before 7. So that is a bit of a concern. So I will vote against that amendment. Does anyone else wish to speak? Do you wish to speak?
Yeah, I agree with the issue of staff arriving. And I notice in council's own planning policy on childcare centres, it says it may be limited to 7 a.m, but it also says 7 p.m. And this one is planning to close at 6 p.m. So there's it's grabbing half an hour earlier, but closing an hour earlier as well. So I think that on balance, that residential amenities probably being looked after to some extent. And I just know that with, a diverse working environment, not being able to drop children off till after 7 may be quite restricting, I think.
Thank you. Councillor Woodall, as mover, would you like to close on the amendment?
Yes, thank you. Just very briefly, in terms of the hours of operation, my understanding is that other childcare centres where there have been approvals for the 7 a.m. start time hasn't prevented staff arriving beforehand, but the centre itself does not formally open to children until 7 a.m. So that's my understanding of how it works in practice. So I think that's a reasonable compromise. If additional wording is required to make that or to clarify that, I'd be happy to include that. But certainly my intention was for the staff to be able to arrive before 7 a.m, noting that there's not a huge number of staff arrivals, but with the bulk of parents dropping off children not occurring till 7 a.m. and after. So that was the intent.
Okay. Councillor, would you then like to amend your amendment to state that the centre shall only be open to clients between the hours of 7 a.m. and 6 p.m?
Yes, I'd be happy with that.
Councillor Lim, as seconder, would you be happy with that?
I would agree with that too. And that's consistent with point 14 as well. Thank you.
Okay, so that forms the new amendment, just to clarify the intent. We've all spoken for or against the amendment already, so I won't do that again. So the amendment we're voting for now is an amendment to condition 6 that states the centre shall only be open to clients or between the hours of 6:30 a.m. and 6 p.m. Monday to Friday to the satisfaction of the city.
7 a.m, sorry.
7, sorry. Okay, let's vote on that amendment then. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Councillor Whittle, I think you will have the floor. Nothing further?
Nothing further to add, thank you.
Any other member like to speak for or against the primary motion? I will briefly speak for the motion. Although the site is in a residential area, I'm comfortable that the proposal meets the objectives of the residential zone, specifically the requirement for any non-residential development to be compatible with and complementary to existing residential development and the streetscape. The proposal meets the location criteria in the city's policy relating to childcare centres. Given this, and given there is already a current approval for a centre on the site, it would be difficult to argue that the site isn't suitable for the use proposed. I think the impact of the centre on directly adjoining neighbours is minimised due to the site being surrounded on 3 sides by roads, and it's well serviced by footpaths and public transport. Also, parking and servicing areas will be contained within a basement and not at grade, and that helps with amenity impacts on neighbours. There'll also be limited interface between outdoor play areas and the immediate neighbours, and where there is interface, sound walls and landscaping will be installed to minimise any potential impact. I don't think the proposal will have negative impact on the streetscape, given the residential design of the building and the high quality landscaping proposed. I note that although it's a non-residential use, the proposal has been assessed against the R codes as required by the city's childcare policy, and that the proposal meets the objectives and the design principles of relevant clauses of the codes. And where discretion is sought against the design principles of the codes, this has been well justified by the applicant and in the city's responsible authority report. In terms of parking, I note that discretion is sought for the provision of 20 bays instead of 23, but I accept the argument that support staff will attend outside of peak hours and will be able to use the bays that are available at that time. I also accept that provision of separate motorcycle bays is not necessary given the nature of this specific use. I'm comfortable that the key issues of noise and traffic impacts have been adequately addressed in the report and the accompanying technical documents, and in responses to questions at today's meeting. And I note that suitable conditions of approval have been recommended to ensure that noise impacts are appropriately managed and mitigated. So all that said, I'm happy to support with the conditions as amended. Councillor Lim, reverting to you as mover of the primary motion, do you wish to close?
Nothing to really add to a closing statement, but I just, yeah, I think I've already spoken quite a bit in my initial mover statement. Thank you.
All good. Thank you. We will then vote on that primary motion now as amended by those conditions. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to item 4, Form 2 DAP applications. There are none for the City of Melville today. Item 5, Section 31, SATRI considerations, also nil. So with that, I thank Councillor Matthew Woodall and Councillor Daniel Lim, our local government DAP members for the City of Melville.
Thank you.
For your attendance and participation, and thank you to the City staff for being part of the meeting today.
Thanks, everyone.
Right, are we ready to roll straight into part C of our agenda? All right, for this part of our agenda, I welcome Councillor Ben Kunza from the City of Canning to the panel. How are you today, Councillor?
Well, thanks. I hope you're all well too.
Great, thank you very much. Item 1 on Part C, City of Canning. Panel members need to have considered all the documentation contained within Part C of the agenda and the Part C related information, noting that an R13 direction response was published on the 7th of July. Could I please confirm by a show of hands that members have considered all the information? Thank you. Item 2, disclosures of interest. I have received a declaration of interest for this item from Councillor Kunza on the basis of his previous involvement in consideration of a matter to do with verge landscaping adjacent to the subject site at a previous City of Canning Council meeting in 2020. The DAP Executive Director has reviewed the declaration, is comfortable that the interest is appropriately categorised as an impartiality interest, and that the nature of the interest is not of a magnitude that gives rise to a reasonable apprehension that Councillor Kunza may be biased and so unable to bring an impartial mind to the deliberations. Therefore, he and I are both satisfied that Councillor Kunza can continue to participate in the matter as a DAP member today. No other disclosures of interest have been received to this point. Do any other members wish to make any declarations of interest in relation to this item? No? Councillor Kunza, can I just clarify, this particular matter hasn't been before Council, has it?
No, it hasn't.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Moving on to the item then, item 3.1, lot 33, number 151, Riverton Drive, Rossmoyne, 2 multiple dwellings, DAP number 25/02834. We've got 3 presenters on this item today. We have Nick Grindrod from Rise Urban speaking in favour of the recommendation in the report. We have Chris Catlow speaking in favour of the recommendation in the report, and we have David Chandler from Dale Alcock speaking in favour of the recommendation in the report. Presenters, I remind you, in accordance with clause 4.2 of our DAP standing orders, your presentations are limited to 3 minutes. We've read all the documentation you have provided, so I encourage you to focus on your key points so that you can get through them in your 3-minute time frame, and we'll be able to ask you questions at the conclusion of that 3 minutes. I believe you're up first. Your 3 minutes starts when you're ready.
Could I please have the PowerPoint up on the screen? And I'll use that. Yeah, no worries. Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for your time. Just to clarify, we're absolutely not speaking in the favour of the report recommendation for refusal. We are seeking for the application to be approved. We can boil the city's reasons for refusal down into 2 concerns. They think the building is more than 2 dwellings, and they think the building is too large. To address the number of dwellings, we trust our written deputation and past justifications have sufficiently outlined why it's reasonable to treat this development as 2 multiple dwellings. To summarise, it's because the development has been designed and will be used as 2 multiple dwellings. If the DAP supports the city's position and wants to treat the development as 3 multiple dwellings, then the simple solution is to apply the 1/3 aged and dependent person's site area concession, in which case the yield is still compliant, the relevant R-code's design principles have been met, and the development should be approved. To address building size, I'd like to speak about the design intent. One of the key objectives for the project from the beginning was for the building to blend with the typical housing forms on Riverton Drive, and to have the appearance of a large single house. You can see from this perspective that it looks just like many other contemporary houses on Riverton Drive, 2 stories with an undercroft basement and expansive terraces facing the river, just like the Catlows' current house next door at 149 Riverton Drive, which is shown to the right of this picture. We undertook a study of typical corner lot developments along the street to inform the development design. Riverton Drive is a riverfront street in a prestigious suburb and predominantly consists of large houses oriented towards the river. You'll note that of the 5 examples shown on this slide, the major entry for every single house faces the side street, yet the more substantial setback is to Riverton Drive. 153 Riverton Drive, across the road to the east, is the most similar example of them all. We've also considered how the building bulk will be perceived. This plan shows that for people approaching along Riverton Drive or 2nd Avenue, this building does not protrude unreasonably close to either street compared to the surrounding context and does not block existing sightlines. So now we've established that the development form, footprint and setbacks respond to the broader context. I think it's quite clear that this is not overdevelopment of the site. It's actually a considered response to the broader streetscape with a floor plate that meets the unique needs of the Catlow family. We're hopeful that the DAP recognises that this development is worthy of approval on the basis that it will be a positive addition to the Riverton Drive and 2nd Avenue streetscapes. It is consistent with the R codes and ultimately it is the face of housing diversity in this locality. Briefly, on the Reg 13 request from earlier this week, we don't support the reasons for the deferral as they're tantamount to a refusal. Thank you again for your time, and once Chris and David have spoken, we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Nick. And just for the benefit of anyone watching online, either now or in the future, to pick up what Nick said, all 3 presenters will be speaking against the recommendation in the report and not in favour, as I said earlier. Okay, Councillor Kunze, do you have any questions of this presenter?
Did the presenter not say that we'd ask questions at the end of the 3 presentations?
Happy to do that. Would you prefer to run through all 3 presentations?
I think it would be beneficial for all 3 presentations to go
We'll do
first.
that then. Mr. Catlow. You are. Welcome to the meeting. Your 3 minutes will start when you are ready. We can't hear you, Mr. Catlow.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we do. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. Tony here is 36 years old. She has no self-help skills. She's totally blind, requires hoist transfers on up to as many as 24 times on average per day. So she needs 2 people with her at all times. That's the 24/7 basis. Tony and we, as our only child, have lived in Rosmoyne for 30 years, and she's very well known in the community. It's now time for Tony to live independently and for us to stay close by, to age in place, but also to have privacy. Tony has very specific needs and has lots of equipment, so needs a very large flat floor plate for her walking frame, her equipment storage, her music therapy, etc., and support for 2 support workers at all times. Therefore, live-in and shift work must coexist with her in Tony's space. The slope of 2nd Avenue means that it's impossible to load a wheelchair. There's also no footpath to the river. So the only way that Tony can gain access to and from the building is from Riverton Drive. All vehicle access and pedestrian access to the river is therefore from Riverton Drive, and including support workers and family parking. The pedestrian door that's proposed on 2nd Avenue will be used primarily as an emergency exit and little else. Therefore, in our view, the primary street must be Riverton Drive, and we feel that it's both unfair and unreasonable to designate 2nd Avenue as the primary street frontage. The upper floor also has to be generous in size for our hobbies and regular overseas visitors. And we have an absolute belief in accessibility from 36 years of experience of disabilities. Therefore, we have insisted that we have large accessible corridors and bathrooms. When we first engaged with Dale Alcock Projects, our two objectives of the design was to ensure that we had a flat ground floor space for Tony and her carers, bearing in mind the topography of the site, and that the building must fit within the existing streetscape. We believe that both of those things have been achieved. So as a consequence, we're very disappointed with the city's unnecessarily prescriptive assessment of our application. And we ask that you please approve the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Catlow. Spot on with your 3 minutes, so thank you for that. Mr. Chandler, please stay online for questions. Mr. Catlow, Mr. Chandler, your 3 minutes starts when you are ready.
Thank you. I want to speak to some of the key design issues, but Chris has stolen my thunder in many ways, so I'm going to be a little bit repetitive. Can I ask you to go to the section, which is slide number 11?
Sorry, the key isn't working for whatever reason. This one?
Yep. It's a little bit hard to pick this up, but there is a red dashed line, which is the existing ground level superimposed over the building section. And this just demonstrates the point that Chris has already made. Second Avenue falls about 3.5 metres from top to bottom, and with an average fall of 1 in 12. So as Chris stated, it is totally impractical for disabled access to come off that street. And therefore, Riverton Drive becomes the practical default main entry. All of Tony's access to the building and all her access to the river will be via that entry. The family will enter through that entry. Her carers will enter through that entry. The location of the access off Second Avenue, as Chris alluded to, is essentially there to comply with fire exit requirements, and it is very much a secondary access point. Chris also mentioned, and Nick has also alluded to, the fact that a main driver for the design has been the desire to fit into the streetscape. Can I get you to go to, I think it's number 6, the perspective.
The perspective, this one or the other one?
No, that one. This image is demonstrating that point quite clearly, we believe, in terms of scale, in terms of location on the site, in terms of the building bulk setbacks. We believe it is totally appropriate for the existing area. And also, it, as has also already been mentioned, demonstrates the fact that it reads as a single house. Go to number 9. This plan demonstrates some of the changes that we made to the design during the DRP process. We took on board some of their comments and reviewed the design. There is a street tree in Second Avenue, which we had originally thought was going to be an issue. We've agreed to retain that tree. I think that's a very positive outcome. The yellow strip at the top left is some extra landscaping that the DRP asked us to incorporate, and the red sections are where we've actually set back terraces and the building itself.
Mr. Chandler, you're at your 3 minutes. I'll ask you to wrap up.
There's just one final point I wanted to issue. If we go to number 11. Just quickly, if I can talk to this. One of the main changes we made was to set back the basement level. You can notice in the bottom right-hand corner that the terrace actually cantilevers past that building line. Sorry, just 10 seconds. And these two images, the next one as well, Nick, demonstrate that. And we believe that's made quite a substantial improvement in terms of bulk and the visual appeal to the street. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, could we get our panel members back on the screen, please? Right, thank you. Councillor Kunzer, we will start with you. Do you have any questions of the applicant team?
Yes, I do. To the first presenter, just with respect to the contention of how the design has been assessed with respect to the number of dwellings, whilst my interpretation is a lot of it is based on how the property will be used, I'm just wondering what's your view on when the property is sold, whether it be in the short term or the medium term or the longer term, that the design will enable the property to be used as 3 individual dwellings and potentially 4?
Sorry, I've just lost my train of thought. Yeah. So if this application is approved as 2 multiple dwellings, Chris and Helga will only have a right to use the development as 2 multiple dwellings. In my view, I think that if it were to be used as 3 multiple dwellings, to legally do so, a change of use application would be required. And so therefore a DA would be required. Now, the practicalities of I guess, doing works internally to the building under the LPS rates, if a change of use is required, internal works also require an approval. So I guess our view on that is works would be required, and that would require a DA. It wouldn't be permitted under an approval for 2 dwellings, and so it's not an issue to be considered as part of this application.
Councillor Kunze, any further question?
No further questions. Thank you.
Other panel members?
The visual appeal of the Second Avenue elevation relies heavily on the landscaping of the road reserve and very little on the property itself. What's your comments around that? Why couldn't the property provide more landscaping?
I think it ultimately comes down to the need for the building, the hallways, the rooms in the building to be larger than normal to meet the needs of Tony, Chris and Helga. Having a fair bit of experience in the specialist disability accommodation space, almost every building that is specifically designed for people with disabilities has to be larger, and so landscape is a natural, or less landscaping is a natural consequence of that. So we do accept that there is more landscaping in the verge than in the setback. But I guess when we were conceiving the development, we were treating Riverton Drive as the primary street, and therefore we applied the standard 1.5 metre secondary street setback to Second Avenue, which has been maintained along that line. There are 1 or 2 minor exceptions. There's a small ramp up to the front terrace, but the other alfresco further along is at ground level, so we don't think that's an issue. So I guess we think the design principles have been met in that respect, particularly with the change we've made to keep that existing tree in the verge. We don't see how the potential for there to be more landscaping in the setback, given the expectations set by the R-codes of that being 1.5 metres, could warrant refusal.
Just talking about the tree on the verge, you make it sound like you had an option to remove the verge tree.
Well, that was what we initially proposed. It wasn't supported by the city. We took those comments on board, and we made changes to the basement wall, a few planter beds, and also the footpath into that entrance to accommodate it.
I take your observations about secondary street, and particularly with the dwelling opposite being treated exactly the same. But in your other assessment of other corner sites, were there any other of these larger buildings that pushed into that 3 metre setback to the extent that yours does?
I wouldn't say there were any developments that that went to exactly 1.5 metres. So I guess my answer is no. But I guess our position in that respect is that the disability needs warrant that decrease in setback, sorry.
And maybe as a follow-on to that, to Mr. Chandler, given that it's a dwelling of total tally of 840 odd square metres, excluding the basement, which might house up to 5 people, I take it, 3 permanent people and 2 carers. Is that 1.5 metre pull into the setback on those a couple of occasions of critical importance to the scale of this building? You know, that's a lot of floor space for 5 people.
Yes, you can say that, but we have very carefully planned out that ground floor in particular, and I would say there's very little room to modify it to still meet the functional requirements. And also we have a basement size that is dictated by the lot width and the requirements for numbers of car bays and so on. So that line is also very tight in terms of where it can be located in relation to the boundary.
Thank you.
I have a few questions. So unless I've misinterpreted what your R30 or your subsequent information has said, you stated in your submission that the 1/3 site area concession for aged and dependent persons applies, and that the site exceeds the 900 square metre threshold required to permit 3 dwellings. So you seem to be relying on the concessions afforded to special purpose dwellings. Is that correct?
Only if the DAP considers that this is more than 2 multiple dwellings. If it is only 2 multiple dwellings, then it's compliant without having to rely on the aged and dependent person's site area concession.
Okay. Now, in the event we decide that it's not, and we'd go with the deferral to allow some things to be ironed out, and I understand what you've said about it's effectively a refusal. I don't agree necessarily. To iron some of these things out, and you went away and looked at one of these or more as aged and dependent persons dwellings, you then believe that you can make the number of dwellings work on the site, but that it can't work on the site if it's more than 3 multiple dwellings, but it can if it is special purpose dwellings?
Yes, so it can work if it's treated as 3 multiple dwellings. Under the table in the back of the R codes, the average site area in an R20 zone is 450 metres squared. Under clause 5.5.2 in part B, that can be decreased by 1/3 to 300 square metres. 300 times 3 is 900. The site is 1,004 square metres.
So given that the interaction with the city and the concerns in that regard, why did you not apply for those in the first instance?
Because we think it's 2 dwellings. The other side to it is that there's a deemed to comply requirement in clause 5.5.2 that requires a section 70A notification to be applied to the title. Our first preference is for that notification to not be applied to the title. However, if it's the difference between approval or refusal, then we'll accept it.
Okay. So, and you had them on screen in a minute, and in the recent submission you made within the last few days, you've included some visuals of how the proposed development is intended to sit within the streetscape context, and you've relied on that a little bit today. So unless I missed them, why weren't those visuals included in the application or the package of information provided in the DAP agenda?
Do you mean the renders showing the street?
Because I found those particularly helpful when they came through now, but I guess for assessment purposes.
We could have improved in that respect. We didn't think it was necessary as we were confident in our views. You'll have noted that we provided extensive written justification. There were perspectives provided with the DA set from the very beginning. Those particular ones weren't provided, but I would also add that we haven't had any meaningful, advice from the city about the design principles aspect of this development. In all of the requests for further information, they were worded along the lines of this deemed to comply requirement has not been met. Please amend your design to meet this deemed to comply requirement. And I struggle to accept requests like that because they're not how the R codes work. So I guess if we had known that there was as much of an issue as it was, and we did ask the city multiple times if it was an issue that was worthy of refusal and they refused to tell us, we may have been able to provide that earlier had we had that knowledge.
Thank you. So the updated landscape plan that you provided in the last few days, was that previously submitted to the city, or is that the plan that they've been asking for?
So we provided a landscape plan with the development application. I believe we updated it at the first RFI. This particular one we have only provided now. We didn't provide it purely due to time constraints to get the final plans in. We were in a race against the clock essentially at that point in time.
Okay. You stated in your submission that the spaces on the ground floor are functionally linked but are not self-contained or separate dwellings. Given there are duplication of some key spaces like laundries and kitchens between the northern and southern wings, and I'm asking these questions with the understanding that there is a need for unique consideration of unique circumstances. So I'm not ignoring those, but just looking at the codes and the planning stuff that we need to look at. Given there is duplication of laundries and kitchens between the northern and southern wings, the wings could be considered to be self-contained, could they not?
I guess they could be used in that way, but we're not applying for that.
Just last one from me. Looking at the basement, there are parking spaces for 8 cars in that undercroft. So unless your client is a collector enthusiast, this seems a little bit excessive, even if you're providing parking for carers. So could I ask you to comment on the need for 8 parking bays? Won't necessarily change the design.
Could we ask Chris to?
Sure, please.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
So as I mentioned, Tony has 2 on 1 carers 24/7. Yeah. So when there is a shift changeover, there would be up to 4 cars in the parking garage simply for carers, let alone our own vehicles. And Tony also has her own specialised vehicle. So virtually all of those 8 bays would be taken up with that one occurrence, let alone any visitors we may have, or indeed any additional therapists that regularly visit Tony, such as physiotherapists, music therapists, occupational therapists, etc.
Thank you. You've clarified that for me, Mr. Catlow. Thank you. Any other questions of the applicant team? No. We will then move on to the local government officers. And I believe with us today we have Petronella Tandroyan, Shaquille McBull, Troy Bosic and Matthew Reid from Jackson McDonald, representing the City of Canning. Councillor Kunze, are there any questions you would like to pose to the city officers?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. The comment made before, might I just ask, with respect to the lack of information or the purported lack of information provided through this process to the applicant, the comments made previously. This is the first time in my almost 10 years I've seen a DA recommended refusal. I'm just wondering if the city might want to respond or provide some sort of information as to why there's not been an alignment or a number of these issues ironed out, and especially as the presenter has stated earlier.
Thank you.
To the chair, thank you very much for the opportunity. Essentially, the request for information made to the applicant was exactly the same as in we would do with any application. So any references to deemed to comply are made when, and it's basically the guarding area, and any variation to that are basically left with the applicant to justify under the design principle. So, I mean, we have not only provided our technical assessment and the request for the information, but also provided the applicant with the DRP meeting minutes, which basically both things go together, and it has been done with a thorough information included.
Thank you. Councillor Kunze, any further questions?
Yes, and just with respect to the setbacks along adjacent perpendicular streets in the area, Obviously, that's a point of contention with respect to whether the setbacks along 2nd Avenue, whether if this was approved would be consistent. Do you agree that there's this aligns with what's on Tuscan Street and other perpendicular roads, other parallel roads perpendicular to Riverton Drive?
To the chair, because we have not gone out and done other streets kind of setback analysis. However, the applicant has raised and we have looked at the approved plans for the site across at 153 Riverton Drive. So essentially, the site was plans were approved back in 1990s, 96 in particular. Specifically, so essentially we have looked at the setbacks. They are 3 meters, which is the allowance where you can have building reduced to 3 meters. And we have also noted that in the front setback area, the building is nearly, in the secondary street, which is the Riverton Drive, the building is pushed roughly 10 meters back, which allows them a significant area to be used for compensation purposes. So our calculation would show that the compensation was provided. If we're looking at today's standard, we don't know what was the exact requirements in 1996, but based on the today's requirement, the building is set back at 3 meters, and essentially the compensation area is available within the Riverton Drive frontage area. And we have also provided a diagram within the RAR, which is figure 9, which gives a rough sort of understanding of the existing setbacks along 2nd Avenue for the buildings, probably 3 or 4 buildings back on the 2nd Avenue.
Can I just ask a follow-up on this issue? So in relation to street setbacks, and I went and refreshed my memory yesterday about the definition of a secondary street and a primary street setback. But in relation to street setbacks, which takes precedence in your mind, or which is more important in your view? Compatibility of the proposed built form with existing streetscape patterns, irrespective of which frontage is designated as the primary street, or how the primary street is defined and therefore assessed under the codes?
So both function and form of building, as well as the access requirements, do basically come into the assessment of how we view the primary street and secondary street. In this instance, I mean, it's pretty clear to the city that this Riverton Drive as the vehicular access, where this is the preferred point for vehicular access, or being secondary street. And primary street is generally considered where your primary pedestrian entry is. Now, the building is exactly doing that. That's how the plans have been drawn. The applicant has stated that they have primary access from Riverton Drive. However, city is still of the view that it is pretty obscure and probably not as functional or prominent as the one on the 2nd Avenue. So, I mean, there's a combination of things that has made us form the opinion that, in fact, 2nd Avenue is the primary street.
Yep. So, and that came through in your report. That came through in your report quite clearly, how you've assessed it and why. I guess what I'm asking is there are some different. You seem to be leaning heavily on the fact that the front door is on 2nd Avenue and therefore that's the primary street. And when I look at the definition of that, there is a little bit of movement there. I guess what I'm asking is, if Riverton Drive was considered as the primary street, how would this change your assessment of the suitability of the proposed street setbacks?
Chair, I would like to point out a couple of facts. One is that Riverton Drive is not fully conforming with the primary street setbacks averaging requirements. It's around 5.2 meters setback on average. So that's also a point to be noted. And in terms of if Second Avenue was to be considered as secondary street, I would like to raise the point that the building was, most of the building is at 1.5, but then terraces are above ground and they come to nil setback and essentially have that building bulk increase. So, and as pointed out by one of the members as well, that, basically there's a lack of landscaping on that street. And that was clearly, point made by the DRP members as well during the DRP meetings.
Okay. Back. Any other questions, Councillor Kunza? Reverting back to you, you finished with your questions?
Not at this point in time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Other panel members, questions of the staff?
Look, just talking about Second Avenue, and if it is considered the primary street, that's fine. But in your view, are there opportunities for discretion to be exercised to allow less setback than what's prescribed in the R codes?
Through the chair, it's not an unusual situation that the city would consider variations to the setback. However, we would like to define primary and secondary street based on the function of the dwelling. And that has been the key part of our assessment. Discretion is, it can be exercised by the local government to nominate which street is the primary street and which one is secondary. However, given the basically the layout of the building and this function, the city is at this stage is not convinced that Second Avenue act as a primary street. As a secondary street.
Okay, given I accept what you're saying there, but is the definition of whether it's a primary street or a secondary street less important, and perhaps what's more important is the way it addresses the street, the functionality of the building, and it's the way it sits within the context of the locality?
Through the chair, if the building envelope is concerned, if we don't take into account the access points, then essentially we're looking at 1.4 meter from secondary street and 6 meter. So if in a manner that originally the plans were proposed with access on Riverton Drive, pedestrian access and vehicular access from Second Avenue, the building envelope would be essentially 1.5 meter from Second Avenue. So that's where, insofar as the building volume and siting is concerned, that could have been an option.
Can I just follow up on that? Can I just follow up on that? Because we seem to be getting really hung up on what the R code says a primary street is versus a secondary street. And when I have a look at what the definitions are, there is some room for movement there. So if the applicant is saying their primary, everyone that's coming into that site on a daily basis is going to use Riverton Drive as the primary access because they drive into the garage and then they go up into the building. And it's really for the visitors on occasion to use the front door, which is on the secondary street. I guess I'm pushing you a little bit here to say, do you feel you have any room to move on what the definition is of a primary street and secondary street? I have a view on it, but I'm wanting to get your view on whether you think you have room to move under the definition in the codes.
So essentially, as a previously mentioned that the local government can essentially hold which street is primary and which is secondary based on our assessment. So to answer your question shortly, and essentially, yes, we can. Obviously, we can do so, but as I pointed out before, even if we were to consider Second Avenue as a secondary street, our concern is that the build form as presented, some of the area are basically has nil setback. I would argue that terraces have nil setback, so they are still imposing. So yeah, I mean, in short, the answer is yes, we perhaps can do that.
Okay, and I'll come back to you in a second, but before we move off the setback issue, I note from the objections received or submissions received from some of the neighbours that height and street setbacks were the prominent issues mentioned. So your report, in my view, quite rightly points out that the height is not a significant issue in terms of compliance. But in terms of setbacks, do you think the neighbours are concerned about the actual compatibility of the setbacks all proposed within the existing streetscape context, or rather with the contention that the setbacks on Second Avenue don't comply with the requirements for a primary street setback? So naturally, we flag with people when we send out letters asking for submissions where the areas of discretion are sought, and I'm assuming that's what you do. Do you think neighbours are responding in terms of setbacks to that non-compliance, that technical non-compliance, or do you think that there is genuine concern about the fact that this building envelope, irrespective of which is primary and secondary streets, is not suitable for the context?
I would think that yes, there probably is a combination of both. So essentially, building height is one thing that was advertised, and the second is we advertised Second Avenue as primary street. So I think the comments were probably influenced by both factors. As I also mentioned before, that if Second Avenue was designed as a secondary street, then the building could come at 1.5. So I think regardless of the building can come at 1.5. So I think the crux would have been in terms of the building height. And yes, we have advertised it as a primary street, Second Avenue, and people may have been influenced in their comments because of that.
Okay, thank you. Back to you, Clayton.
Referring to the draft referral, and I accept that it was a result of a Regulation 13 direction for that to be provided, and I note the comments you made about not. Sorry, I'm getting feedback. Right, okay. My question is, does the way you've drafted that suggest that what you're looking for is something which is strictly in compliance with the deemed to comply requirements of the R codes and not allowing any opportunity for variation?
To Chair, essentially the way we have done that is because it's a combination of all the concerns of the city, including the building layout, the individual areas being proposed, and the main concern is that it's more than 2 dwellings. So essentially, we're just saying that the reason it should not be deferred and should be refused is because there's been enough opportunity given to the applicant through the DRP meetings and our discussions with them, and the application has been with us for a long time. So, and the same issues were raised repeatedly through the DRP comments and our request for further information. So I don't believe we would be seeking strict compliance with the deemed to comply provision. It's just that the city believe that it's a 3 or probably 4 dwelling development, and we don't have the discretion.
Further?
Just following up from that, Mr. Melville, they're not applying for 3 or 4 dwellings, and as the plans stand, it couldn't be strated. And Mr. Grinrod said that any use of that building, according to the arrangement of 6 unrelated people in separate dwellings, all those sorts of things, would require approval. So how are you leaping, if you like, from the application, which is clearly for a particular use, to saying we can't approve it because it may be used illegally as 3 dwellings? Is that what I'm saying? Is what I'm saying understanding a correct assessment of how you've assessed it, that it will be used illegally?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that question. I'm not sure if you can see me on the screen or not. I'm sort of towards the end of the table. So one of the issues here is, fundamentally, the city's position is that there are 3, possibly 4 dwellings. The starting point is identifying the dwelling yield for the property, and by virtue of Table D, the yield for the site is 2. When the city looks at the plans for this development, there was a concern that within those plans there was more than 2. In terms of assessing it, it comes back to what the objective. I think each situation needs to be determined on its facts, and it comes back to what is the objective functionality of this particular development. And according to the plans, there appears to be more than 2 dwellings within the plans. So the ground floor, the city has identified that there are 2 separate dwellings within the ground floor. Within the upper floor, there could be 2, but the city is happy with the determination that there's 1. But at the end of the day, what is presented to the city has identified it as being 3 dwellings, not the 2 that has been put forward by the applicant.
So can I just ask, and this comes back to the BCA and the construction code and so on. So would 2 dwellings be able to be interconnected from a fire perspective?
Unfortunately, I would not be able to advise on that. I probably would have. We don't have a building surveyor in the room at the moment, so I haven't explored that particular aspect.
So I think that is something that I'd be keen to understand. Obviously not now, but as portrayed on the current plans, can you have 2 separate dwellings that are connected by a door that's not a fire door? And I guess that's important for the city to have a think about. If we get to a point where this is shifts to a deferral, it's one of the things I think the city needs to look at. But thank you. You're not able to answer it at the minute, and I understand that. Back to you, Mr. Howe. Any further questions? Okay. Look, I've got a couple more. So the applicant is contesting your assessment of open space. Did you include the terrace spaces in your calculations as suggested by the applicant? And if not, how come? And if the terraces were to be included, would you agree with the applicant that the open space would comply? Could I just have some comment from you on that, please?
And Chair, essentially it's applicant's an interpretation. However, our interpretation differs. We have looked at the definition of open space in the R codes. Essentially, applicant is relying on the inclusion in open space, which is fine. However, there is further down the definition, it also talks about exclusions. And exclusion clearly states that any floor areas that are above 1 meter, areas such as balconies and the likes of that are above 1 meter, are to be excluded from open space. So once the terrace on the first ground floor is being used and can be considered on its own as an open space. However, the roof above it is a balcony, and therefore we have just excluded that bit, which as per the R code is not included in the open space calculations. So essentially that's the difference between the applicant and our assessment. The roof of the terrace has a function of a balcony as well, and that's excluded from open space calculation.
Okay, thank you. The applicant in the last few days has provided us with an updated landscape plan. Is this the plan you've been asking for, or are you waiting for other or different information?
Madam Chair, basically we have received the plans as being discussed here and received late in the scheme of things, and we still have asked our internal policy department to review it. We have received the feedback on it, and they are still not supportive of that plan. And there are a number of issues they have outlined, and it's to do with the distance of ramp from the street tree. It's not being meeting the minimum 2 meters still, and they have raised a number of concerns. They have concerns about the hard stand area in the Riverton Drive next to the driveway. They also have concern about the slope of the landscaping. So yeah, it's not approved, and there are some concern about the species being proposed. So overall, the landscaping plan has a number of things that they can be resolved, but they are not resolved at this stage. Not even through with the latest plan.
Okay, and you've not had an opportunity to go back to the applicant yet, given you've only just received that plan. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. I think unless there are any further follow-up questions of the city staff, I think it's time that we move to the report. And the panel has a report in front of you that recommends. Could I ask the city just to turn your mic off, please? Thanks. So we have a report with a recommendation for refusal with a number of reasons, and that is the motion before us. Could I seek a mover and seconder for the recommendation in the report? Would anyone like to move the recommendation for refusal? No? All right. The motion for refusal is lost for want of a mover or a seconder. Given that, we do have an alternate recommendation or an alternate motion for deferral that was published in response to a Reg 13 request for information. I am proposing to put that forward for consideration, but not in the exact form prepared by the city, and I do thank the city for preparing that for us. I'm going to ask the Secretariat to pop that up on the screen. It is a slightly amended version from the one that was distributed to us. And essentially, and I'll zoom through this pretty quickly, essentially the alternate seeks to defer the application for up to 180 days. And that doesn't mean it will take 180, it's up to 180 days to allow the applicant to do the things listed on the screen. And essentially it's to demonstrate achievement of the requirements relating to site area and street setbacks, to demonstrate how the proposal complies with the minimum and average lot area requirements, to allow the applicant to demonstrate compliance with open space requirements, to allow the applicant to demonstrate compliance with landscaping requirements, to allow the applicant to provide amended plans to show how the building's design, use, materials, height complements the streetscape, and to allow the applicant to demonstrate how it sits within its context. And finally, to allow for amended plans to be presented to the city's design review panel for further review and comment. Before I talk this, do I have a seconder for the motion for deferral? We can probably drop that off at the minute and go back to our panel. Do I have a seconder for the motion for deferral? Thank you, Clayton Hyam. Okay, I will speak to the deferral and why I'm seeking to go this way. I was not, in reviewing all the information that was before us, I was not comfortable to refuse the proposal outright. And I just need to say, I understand the city's frustration that they feel they've not been provided with the information that they've asked for to clarify their thinking on landscaping and other matters. And although some of that stuff has come forward now, it was a little late in the day for the city to do a proper assessment of it. I also understand the client's frustration with the perception that the R codes appear to be applied as a blunt instrument for a proposal with bespoke requirements for the intended residents. So I understand there's frustration on both sides. Despite the applicant's unique circumstances and despite the additional information provided, I wasn't comfortable throwing my vote behind an approval at this stage. Because I simply don't have enough information from either the applicant or the city to be able to approve the proposal, and we don't have appropriate conditions to go with that. So we would be making that decision on the run, and I don't think that that would be good planning decision making. But again, I wasn't comfortable to refuse because I think there are unique circumstances that need to be considered, and I think the proposal could be approved if further compromise was made by both the applicant and the city, and that is very important from my perspective. I think that there is hopefully room to move from the applicant's perspective, and hopefully the city, picking up something the applicant said, is not relying on this needs to get as close as possible to deemed to comply requirements. I think in a situation like this, if the proposal meets the objectives of the codes and it meets the design principles, that's what we should be aiming for. To strive for deemed to comply on a proposal like this, I think is not what we should be after. I note the city's reasons for not wanting a deferral, and those reasons spoke loudly of the frustration with lack of adequate engagement and meaningful responses and changes to design from the applicant. Equally, I hear frustrations from the applicant that perhaps they didn't get the feedback that they were after. I would hope that if a deferral is supported by the panel, that the applicant takes cues from this decision that the proposal in its current form is unlikely to be supported by the DAP. That's just my view. Further compromise on design will be required before I would be comfortable throwing my vote behind an approval. I don't agree that an entirely new proposal will be necessary for the application to be supportable, as suggested by the city, but I think the changes will need to be meaningful, the design will need to be improved, and it will need to respond better to the framework. And in saying that, I would hope that the city would look more carefully at issues of primary versus secondary street, look more carefully at issues of what constitutes open space, given the built form and the needs of these specific residents. I would encourage the applicant to consider whether you do want to pursue an application for multiple dwellings or whether it is something else, and then the conditions can be tailored accordingly. I think a deferral would be useful to allow both to go back to the drawing board and to have a more meaningful conversation about this rather than just going to a refusal and then taking it from there. And I understand that we might be well outside of our time frame and it's up to the applicant to go there anyway if they choose to, but I would hope that there could be some balance struck between the unique circumstances of this applicant or application and the city's need to make sure that any proposal does sit comfortably within the streetscape and does adhere to the objectives of the codes. So that is my reason for seeking the deferral, is to allow us another shot at this. Would the seconder like to speak?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, look, I fully support the comments that you've made, particularly the need for both the city and the applicant to compromise to some extent. My initial view of this was almost to support a refusal, but I don't believe that is appropriate at this occasion. I travelled out to the site yesterday. I've actually been out there a number of times before, but I travelled out to the site yesterday and drove around. And while the developments there are large, they generally look like they're in a landscape setting. And I think this one just lacks that that impression for me. So I would hope that there is some more landscaping and some more in the setting of this development. I'm not worried about whether it's 2 or 3 multiple dwellings. I'm not worried about whether it's a primary or secondary street frontage. What it comes down to me is, how does it work in its context there, and does it present well within the streetscape? So, Madam Chair, I'm happy to support the deferral.
Thank you. Do any other panel members? Councillor Kunze.
Thank you, Madam Chair. May I just ask a question to you before I speak?
Sure.
Just with respect to the R13 and the alternate recommendation proposed by the city, it had 8 points. I know in yours some of the language has changed. I'm just wondering, because I saw it relatively quickly, how it's changed from 8 to 7 points, what's been removed?
So I think there was a point, and I don't have the R13 in front of me, but I will pull it up right now. There was a point that dealt with the primary and secondary streetscape, I think. Could you? So there was a point 6 that talked about provide amended plans and information to ensure the floor plans for both the ground floor and upper level are revised to eliminate duplication of room types. I removed that from my perspective. I don't think that's necessary. Ensuring that no spaces can be physically separated and function as more than 2 multiple dwellings. So while I agree with that intent, I think this deferral allows the applicant to go away and think, well, do we still want to apply this to be multiple dwellings, or is this special purpose dwellings if there is a desire to go that way? So I removed that particular one. It's not to say that I don't want them to look at it, but I think it just allows them, rather than to mandate that they change internal spaces and remove duplicate laundries and kitchens. I didn't think that was necessary at this point.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's appreciated for clarifying that. Look, I'll be supporting your alternate recommendation as put. I I must say, coming here, as I commented earlier, in all my almost 10 years on council, this is the first time I've seen our planning department recommend a refusal of a development application. So I put quite weight to their comments in that regard as to the reasons why they don't believe they can support what the proposal. In saying that, though, whilst a lot of the writing in the report and in the R13 was rather definitive, listening to today's responses to questions, there seems to be a number of issues, the language whereby some compromise can be found. And as the previous speakers have stipulated, I'm hopeful that that might be found so that the development can go forward in some way, noting the unique circumstances, the unique reasons why the proposal has been proposed. The setback issue for me, whilst I acknowledge the presenter's comments that it sort of aligns with the house across the road and staff's response that that's a house built in the 1990s. If you go across Rossmoyne to the parallel streets in Tuscan Street, Corinthian Road, these corner blocks, the setbacks on both Riverton Drive and the perpendicular roads, they generally are aligned. And I think that's quite important in terms of the streetscape. So to me, seeing it come encroach on the verge like that is an issue. And as the previous presenters have discussed, potentially that can be looked at. And it's also something that's been quite discussed as whether it's a major issue or a secondary issue, depending on whether it's a primary or secondary access street. But I think it's quite important in terms of the character of the suburb that we maintain that. So it stands out to me whether that's maintained. But I support the amended recommendation and thank the previous speakers for their comments.
Thank you. Any other panel members?
Yeah, look, I'd echo all that. I'd encourage the applicant to give greater consideration to the setbacks that our codes specify. I say consideration as opposed to compliance, and council to reconsider its secondary and primary street consideration. And I'd also bear in mind that from the applicant's point of view that its positioning of its basement should be allow for appropriate deep root zones for the landscaping. It's a significant structure in itself, and I think where it sits will affect your landscaping plan and council's consideration of your exemption that you're requiring or under provision of open space. And if it's landscaping sitting on a basement deck, it's probably not that valuable anyway. So that's sort of a consideration of it. But by and large, it seems that there's general agreement that the purpose of the dwelling and its need is supported. Even the design review panel gave it qualified support in the end. So I think it's worthy of a reconsideration.
Thank you. Look, I'll just briefly close. I hope that we can actually get somewhere with this proposal. I think it's a worthy of consideration. I will say that I'm not particularly, in terms of the setbacks, echoing to a degree what Councillor Kunze has said. I am less concerned with being hung up on which is primary and which is secondary street for this proposal. It has a unique function, and I'm less concerned about how we classify those setbacks or those street frontages. I'm more concerned about how the actual setbacks of the built form, they don't have to match, in my view, but how they respect existing built form along both street frontages. So that, from my perspective, is worthy for the city's information of consideration, is more important than which street is primary and which is secondary, just because of the physical front door. So I'd encourage them to think about that. I don't think there's anything else I need to add that the other speakers have not already added. So I will then close and seek to put the recommendation for deferral to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Moving on to item 4, Form 2 DAP application. There are none today for the City of Canning. Section 3, salary considerations, none City of Canning. Part D, other business, SAT applications and Supreme Court appeals. All SAT applications for the DAPs are listed on the website for anyone who is interested. And with that, I bring the meeting to a close at 11:33 a.m. And I thank all panel members for your participation and attendance today. I thank the city staff for your participation and the people who have made submissions today. And as usual, the Secretariat of the DAP for work. Thank you and see you next time.